Hillary Rodham Clinton.
I'm so happy. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with Secretary Clinton. As you know, she was my boss. Last year, I worked on the campaign, and I'm just so happy to be here in my capacity as a journalist to talk about your book and really just what's going on in this world. Because when I walked in, I said to everyone, you know, is there anything going on that we should be paying attention to? And just to get started right off the bat, we've seen what happened this weekend with the NFL and other athletes in the NBA being attacked by the President of the United States. What's your reaction to both his attacks on these high-profile black athletes, and what would you say if you were the president and you see these on-field protests happening?
Well, I think it's deeply troubling that the president would be attacking black athletes for expressing their opinions peacefully. Protest is a part of the American way of life, and it's something that I'm very proud of, whether I agree or disagree. I think peaceful protest is part of what has helped us make progress, learn more, be a better country over time. And I just couldn't help thinking that he has attacked these black athletes for peacefully protesting, but he doesn't really attack white supremacists, neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klanners, or Vladimir Putin, who interfered in our election. And I think it's all part of his political calculation, and I really think that's bad for the country. He wants to set people against each other. He wants to divide us. At the same time he was doing all of that, we had American citizens in Puerto Rico who are in a desperate condition. Right. He has not said one word about them, about other American citizens in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I'm not sure he knows that Puerto Ricans are American citizens. And you contrast that. I mean, part of what I've always thought you're supposed to try to do as president, I don't care what party you are, you're supposed to try to represent all Americans, and you're supposed to try to bring us together, not feed our divisions. So like everybody else, I was pretty glued to what was going on this past weekend, and it made me sad, Zerlina. It really did. I take no pleasure in watching him do this. I keep hoping that, you know, I'm going to see a change. I think a lot of Americans hope for that. You and I worked together in the campaign. We tried to point out some of what he had said in the past and what he was promising to do. But the position itself, the office, does impose a mantle of responsibility that I hope he will assume and stop this really unfortunate attacking and dog whistling and doing what he is to pit Americans against Americans. We need to pull together and work together, and I hope that despite him, we will do that.
Do you think this is a turning point on the issue of race in this country?
Oh, my goodness. I hope that it's an eye-opener. I hope that it may be a turning point for some people. Some of the people who've spoken out, I think, were surprising. Some of the owners, some of the other athletes who have supported the right to protest, supported their teammates and the players. I thought that the kind of pushback from Steph Curry and LeBron James was also eye-opening for people. You know, it strikes me that we've always had to keep working to overcome racism. Let's just be clear. This is not something here today, gone tomorrow. Right. It's been around since our founding. We fought a civil war over slavery. We have had to just work hard and dig deep. And the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, were major accomplishments, unlike anything that's happened in any country, anywhere in the world, where we said, you know what, we are all created equal. We do want to be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And I think we have to really talk to our children right now, who are seeing a lot of this, and it's got to be really confusing for them to hear the kind of language that the president uses. What he said about the players, at that rally, I guess in Alabama. We need to say, look, we can have disagreements, and hey, bring them on. I'm all for that. But let's not be engaging in prejudice and bigotry. We don't need that. We need to overcome it the best we can.
And in the book, turning to your book, What Happened, one of the most moving chapters is about the mothers of the movement. And a lot of people don't realize how that developed, how they ended up campaigning for you last year. And ironically, that's what the protest in the NFL is about, is the police killings of Black people and protesting that. Talk about when you first met the mothers, what that experience was like, and what you learned from them about this issue of police brutality.
Well, I do write about them. I write about meeting them for the first time at a small restaurant in Chicago. They were mothers who had lost children to random gun violence, gang violence, and to police action. And that was their common bond, which was a horrible club to be a member of. To sit across the table with these women and to think about being a mom myself, or now a grandmother, and, like the honor student who's riding home from school to go visit his grandparents, and a gangbanger gets on a bus in Chicago and starts shooting, and he tries to protect his friends who he's with, and he dies. And his mother is a captain in the fire department, and his father is, high up in the police department. And she's sitting there just looking at me like I did everything I was supposed to do. Right. Or Trayvon Martin's mother. Wearing a hoodie and going to buy Skittles is enough to get you killed in America. And then, of course, the police incidents. In so many ways, unarmed people being killed by our police who have to do a better job of trying to defuse situations. I'm not saying our police don't face danger. They do, and we've got to support them. Because I also say in that chapter, police officers have been assassinated by people who have gone after them because they were wearing the uniform. Right. This violence, wherever it comes from, has to be restrained. And of course, if you're a police officer, you have a greater responsibility because you are invested with authority to defend us and enforce laws. So when I met these women, I was totally overwhelmed by their stories and by their character and by their presence. And I told them, I said, I know politicians have come and talked to you and disappeared, and I want to know what I can do to try to help. And we became friends, and they traveled for me, they spoke out for me, and I was deeply moved by that. And then, of course, I got to know quite well some of the parents from Sandy Hook, where those precious children and their educators were murdered, and talking to those moms in particular about what they went through. And then, of course, my good friend Gabby Giffords and her husband Mark Kelly. I write about all of them because I don't want their stories to get lost. Right. It's kind of like there's so much violence that one story doesn't really stay very long until the next story comes, and then that story doesn't grab us. We've gotten desensitized to what's happening when it comes to violence, and particularly gun violence. So it was, for me, a way of really showing my respect and paying tribute to these family members who have faced something that all of us would hope never to have happened to anyone we know, and certainly no one we love.
Absolutely. And I think the work that they did on the campaign last year, as well as Black Lives Matter and all the protests that they have been doing for the past few years, have been really important. Where do you see the tension between, the resistance and Black Lives Matter and other protest movements, and how they are interacting with the powers that be? Where do we go from here in terms of where these protest movements are going?
Well, I was encouraged during the campaign. I did meet with a lot of different people, as you have mentioned, Zerlina. I also met with police chiefs, both current and retired, to talk about how we can, try to bring communities together. I met with a group of really amazing young men who are reaching out in their community, working with the police. That's what I wanted to do. My goal as president was to say, look, every life is precious, and we have to pay attention to parts of our community, because I think of the American community, right, where we've lost too many lives in ways that, frankly, are distressing, and we need to do better. And when I met with the police chiefs from big cities, from obviously New York and Chicago and LA and lots of other places, they're all really aware of that. And they were saying, yeah, we want to work together. We like some of the programs that have been started under the Obama administration. We need better connections with the community. And they face really tough problems. And one of the big problems our police face is they are often the ones who have to deal with mentally ill people because we don't have adequate facilities or support. So someone who is acting out, someone who is behaving in a very, dangerous way to himself or others, there's nobody to call except for the police. And most of our police are not trained to deal with that. How do you talk somebody down who has gotten off his meds and is schizophrenic or whatever the problem might be? So a lot of these encounters are between a police officer trying to figure out what to do, and there's no mental health support. And one of the goals that I had, and what we worked on in the campaign, was to say, how do we support our police in dealing with those issues? But we also have to be really clear that there has to be accountability. If people have behaved impulsively or against protocol and that has resulted in the loss of life, there does have to be accountability. So this is not either or. This is putting it all together. And the protests that really started with great energy, starting in 2015 and went on from there, were very much a continuation, in my mind, of the civil rights protests, where people put themselves on the line back in the 50s and 60s to bring about change, not just for themselves, but for everybody. And that's what I think we should be focused on, is how do we equip our country with the best responses to try to make sure that we are treating everybody appropriately. Doesn't mean there aren't bad guys, because there are bad guys, but put them in a separate category and deal with them as we must. But for everybody else, the vast, vast majority, let's figure out how we can be listening better and responding more appropriately and working to find solutions.
And it seems to me that a part of this conversation needs to be that we need to talk about identity politics. There are other high-profile Democrats like Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders that have said Democrats should stop talking about identity so much and pivot towards economic issues. Do you agree with that?
Well, I've said we need to fight for both economic justice and social justice. And I don't see how you give up one or the other. As a woman, I'm grateful that we've had lots of changes in my lifetime that I've been able to benefit from. When I was a young woman, there were lots of doors that were closed just because I was a woman. So is my identity to be dismissed because I think it's great that we keep trying to knock down barriers to women? I hope not. And I would feel the same way about, race or ethnicity or religion. Part of the American experiment, and certainly the dream as I understand it, is to knock down those artificial barriers and judge people on their merits, on their character, as Dr. King said. that means there are a lot of people you're still not going to like. You're not going to enjoy being around, but you're doing it on the basis of who they are, not how they present to you.
Right.
And that is something that is hard. I'm not saying it's not. And one thing that's happened in our country is we've gotten further separated one from the other. I mean, one of the great things about living in New York City is, you see every kind of person every day. I mean, you can't, walk down the street or go to a restaurant. It's all right there for you. And I think that is, very exciting. And it is one of the advantages our country has, despite, I think, the view that the president holds. Our diversity is one of our great strengths. We have people from everywhere who still want to come here, who want to contribute, who want to work hard. And we have people bringing different perspectives. Like your being on the campaign brought different perspectives, which were really valuable to us. And that was true for everybody who was there. I can't imagine that you just want to, put yourself in a little corner and say, I'm only dealing with, working with a certain group of people.
Right.
And so I think that it's too easy to say, well, we don't want to do one thing. We have to do both. Economic justice, we need to do much more to create more economic opportunities and jobs to, deal with what is a very serious inequality problem when it comes to wealth and income. Stand up against special interests, all of which, I talked about and certainly would have done, unlike the current president who is in I think a mode of, he used to talk about draining the swamp. I think he drained the swamp and got rid of all the little creatures, and now he's filling it with predators of all kinds of sizes and particular, dangerousness. No, I think we could have done a lot to try to begin to get us back on the right track with economic justice, but not at the expense of social justice.
Right. You mentioned some of the barriers that you face as a woman, and one of the most important chapters, I think, in the book is on being a woman in politics. And I'm going to quote from it. You said, "This has to be said. Sexism and misogyny played a role in the 2016 presidential election. Exhibit A is that the flagrantly sexist candidate won. A whole lot of people listened to the tape of him bragging about sexually assaulting women, shrugged, and said, 'He still gets my vote.' What's your message for those people today?"
Well, I think I was as surprised as a lot of people were by all of that. But I've tried to, take a step back, and in the book tried to analyze it so that it does serve as maybe a set of guidelines for women, especially young women who want to get into politics, because I don't want what happened in November or anything that they saw or experienced to discourage them, because I think the best answer for sexism in politics is more women in politics and getting more women who are out there standing up, speaking out, arguing their point of view, taking the slings and arrows, because as soon as you step into the arena, everything about you is fair game. It's just remarkable. I mean, if you express an opinion on Twitter or on YouTube, you make a comment, and people know you're a woman by maybe the name or your photo, they just pile on.
Right.
And I've seen this over and over again. And so I think it is a little bit, daunting for women who are interested in not just politics, but government, public policy, speaking out. Like we have this big debate about the Affordable Care Act. There are a lot of women who are right in the center of that debate because they make health decisions. Their health is going to be affected. Their family is going to be affected. So we want those voices because that adds immeasurably to the quality of the debate. So when I wrote this chapter, a lot of what I wrote in this book was really painful to write. I would write, and then I'd have to go lie down, like taking the vapors or something, and kind of get my energy back up, and then go back and write some more. But I wanted it to be as candid as I could be, pulling the curtain back about what it felt like to be the candidate, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that people would have a perspective that you don't get from the press, and perhaps a bit more unique because of my being the first woman nominee. So in writing about it, I wanted also to make the point, it's not just about me. I mean, it can feel that way sometimes when all of the attacks and the criticism just keeps coming. But then you look at what's done to Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or Kirsten Gillibrand, or on the Republican side, the horrible things that, Trump said about women interviewers, about the only Republican woman on the stage.
Right.
It is not just about one woman. It is endemic sexism and misogyny. And if you have a wife, a sister, a daughter, a granddaughter, you have a stake in saying, hey, come on, this is not what we want to have in our politics. So I hope that chapter is of special interest and maybe usefulness to young women.
And I love in the book when you go through almost like a tutorial for folks who don't read feminist blogs, because I come from the feminist blogosphere, and you give us a nice guidebook and in these terms, mansplaining, which I love, right? You're an expert at dealing with mansplainers. Intersectionality, revenge porn, trolls, which you mentioned earlier, and emotional labor. How do you see the role of feminist writers and young women in this movement and helping the American public writ large understand how this impacts our real lives?
Zerlina, I also put in the book what feminism means, because it's often used as a dirty word or an attack. And you can go to the dictionary. It is the belief that, women should have equal rights when it comes to the economy and society and politics with men. Not more than,
right,
and not less than, equal.
Right.
And, when I gave that speech in Beijing back in, 1995, saying that, human rights were women's rights and women's rights were human rights, it was considered just revolutionary that I would say that as the first lady of our country. Because in so many places, women are truly second-class citizens. They are still property. They are treated in just abominable ways. We've made so much progress in our country, and equality has been the driver for that movement. And there's complexity, as you mentioned, in trying to understand everything that's going on. But at its core, equal rights. Equal, not more than, not less than,
right,
equal. So we've knocked down most of the laws. I remember, look, I'm old enough to remember, when I was married, I was practicing law. I was making more money than my husband, who was the governor of Arkansas, or the attorney general, making not very much money at all. And I could not get a credit card in my own name. I mean, that, is not ancient history. And so we've had to knock down a lot of discriminatory laws. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been a champion of this for decades, first as a law professor and a lawyer, and now on the court. And so we have to recognize we've made lots of progress. But we also now are seeing these non-legal barriers. So these stories come out of Silicon Valley.
Right.
You know what? If you are smart enough and you have studied enough and you've put your time in to be an engineer, let's give you the chance to do your best work.
Right.
Instead of, saying, well, we don't want or need, women engineers, which is some of what's going on in the debate in tech and in politics. If you're reading a letter on the floor of the Senate from Coretta Scott King and you're told to stop and you persist nevertheless until you are driven from the Senate floor, and immediately after you're driven, one of your male colleagues goes to the floor and finishes reading the same letter, that's not equal treatment.
Right.
That's all we ask. And, we want to get to the starting line to be able to fulfill our own dreams, whatever they might be, to go as far as our God-given talent will take us. And I think people misinterpret deliberately what the fight for women's equality really is. And that's one of the other reasons that I wrote that chapter.
Why do you think Donald Trump is afraid for women to have equal rights?
Well, I certainly don't understand him, to be blunt, about a lot of things. But he has a long history of denigrating and demeaning women. He objectifies every woman. You are judged wholly on your appearance and whatever fits his notion of appropriate appearance, whatever that is. I think we have a pretty good idea, but nevertheless, I think it's something that he is wedded to, so to speak, and he is someone who really insults and mistreats so many people, women and men. He calls people names, but he's been particularly pointed and vicious about women. And, listening during the GOP primary, I was shocked. And then seeing, what he did and said to me. But he knows that there's a core of people who will applaud him for that. He's not doing it just because he enjoys it, although I do think he enjoys it. He is doing it because his base is being encouraged by it. And so I write in the book how, famous women writers, like Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, which has been on TV recently, writes about the kind of things that were said about me during the campaign, or Mary Beard, who's a classical scholar at Cambridge University, same thing. So people who have a longer view and watch all of this, they knew exactly what Trump was doing. He was really spinning up a lot of his supporters, and men and women, not to miss that. And I said the other day that I think some of the very T-shirts that some of the women at his convention were wearing with incredibly nasty phrases and words about women showed a lack of self-respect for themselves. I mean, you can disagree with me about what I want to do in the economy, or disagree with me about immigration, or disagree with me about a million other things. But when your only argument is to fall back on profanity and, deeply insulting comments, you don't have a lot to say. And that, I think, is what we came to in this past election, where we were trying to break through on all of these fronts, and his response was to stalk me on the stage in the second debate, to call me a nasty woman in the third debate, because he didn't have anything else to say. And I think that should have been a big wake-up call for a lot of people.
And in terms of those 53% of white women, many of those women showed up at the convention wearing misogynistic shirts, why do you think it is that 94% of black women supported you and 53% of white women supported Donald Trump despite those behaviors?
Well, I think there's a couple of aspects to that. I mean, first of all, I'm proud that I won all women, African-American women, Hispanic women, Asian women. And I actually got more white women votes than Barack Obama did in 2012. So there's a political divide. It's a partisan divide among a big number of white women about Democrats versus Republicans. But as I write in the book, I think I was doing pretty well up until the Jim Comey letter on October 28th. We were seeing evidence, both in the data, but also anecdotal, that white suburban women, Republican women, independent women were kind of saying, okay, I'm going to support her. They were turned off by their alternative, but they were also, they saw me in the debates. They were beginning to feel comfortable about supporting me. And we saw my momentum stop and drop after that Comey letter at the end of October. And I write about it in the book because I think any fair analysis of all of the evidence, and I write about my own mistakes and my shortcomings. I think, I'm not a perfect candidate. I don't know one who is, but I'm certainly trying to, take my share of the responsibility. But I really believe that I was on my way to winning and lost the election in the last 12 days. Because of the Comey letter and because of the Russian WikiLeaks misinformation, fake news that was being promoted. So it's kind of hard for me to know exactly what would have happened absent the Comey letter. I mean, if I picked up 2 more points, I would have won in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida. But I didn't because I don't blame voters. This what I considered to be totally phony deal on October 28th, which of course turned out to be phony, but only after a lot of damage was done. I don't blame voters for saying, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to think? I thought this was over, and now it's back. So I just don't understand why it happened to this day. I find it really, just so troubling. So I'm not cutting any slack for anybody, but I'm saying that was such a turning point.
Right.
I don't know, but for that, what would have happened. I think I would have won. That's what I believe. But, that didn't happen.
And you talk in the book a lot about female friendship and the importance of female friendship. And I'm sure, like so many other people in the audience, there have been low moments for you since the election. Mm-hmm. Who do you turn to in terms of your female friends in your moments of despair and when you're feeling low?
I'm really glad you raised that because I owe such a huge debt to my friends. I have a group of friends, some of whom go back to my elementary school days. My best friend from 6th grade who, I email with every day, see whenever I can. One of her daughters just came to my book signing in Chappaqua on Saturday. And, it's just, and there's a whole group of us from high school that still get together. And then, obviously, friends of my adult life. And one thing that I did, which I write about in the book, because it was really a devastating time. I did not think I was going to lose. I did not write a concession speech. And I was really excited about what I could do. And I was immediately going to be reaching out to those people who wore those nasty T-shirts and said all those terrible things about me because I was going to be their president too. And so my friends rallied around. I mean, some literally just showed up at my house and just said, okay, I'm just come. I want a cup of tea. We're just going to talk. Or they would call and say, I'm taking you to the theater, whether you want to go or not. Right. Or I'm coming for dinner. And then a group of us went to Eleanor Roosevelt's home in Hudson Valley. There's two great things to see, the FDR Library and his home, and then what's called Valkill, which was the house that Eleanor had built, and I highly recommend if anybody's touring around to go see the library and the house and then Valkill. And so I was with a group of my friends, and we went up and we toured the library, and then we went over to Valkill, because Eleanor Roosevelt is, one of my personal heroes. And, just spending that day and, laughing, having dinner at the Culinary Institute, which is also up there on the Hudson River, just any chance I had to be with my friends. And, they're the kind of friends who are ready to listen if you want to vent, but are not going to poke and probe if you want to just, have that cup of tea or go out and have dinner and try to forget everything going on. Friendship for me is one of those values, and I am grateful for all the friends of my life. And I also continue to make friends. I'm not somebody who says, okay, I have enough friends. I mean, there are so many people who I meet who intrigue me, who teach me something. So I hope I'll keep making friends the rest of my life.
I think that's a really important lesson, just continually trying to make new friends and build relationships.
Right. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
In your life.
A less fun question. I'm sure you heard the news that Jared Kushner has a private email. And I'm curious if you have some thoughts about that.
Oh, my goodness. Well, again, in the book, I have a whole chapter. If you still have questions, I hope you will read it, because so much of it was overblown, untrue, really aimed to score political points, which it did, and I take responsibility for it. I say it was a dumb mistake, but it was a dumber scandal, and our country, had to go through it, which I regret. But at the end of the day, I feel like, people can read this and understand and have their questions answered. And the hypocrisy of this administration, who knew there was no real scandal, who knew that there was no, basis for all their hyperventilating, Republican members of Congress who politicized the deaths in Benghazi, which I thought was outrageous. We lose people, and it's a terrible thing whenever we lose anyone wearing the military uniform or serving in civilian capacity around the world. That's been going on for a long time. and they deliberately tried to politicize the deaths of those 4 Americans. And now we're finding, as with the latest revelations, that they didn't mean any of it.
Right.
It's just the height of hypocrisy. It is something that, if they were sincere about, I think you'd have Republican members of Congress calling for an investigation. I haven't heard that yet.
I haven't heard that either.
No, I don't think we will. It just goes to the rank hypocrisy that this Trump campaign and now this Trump White House is engaged in. And it, in and of itself, it's bothersome, but I worry about what it means for the lives of Americans. And I go back to health care, because during the campaign, Trump was saying, we're going to give you the greatest health care, and we're not going to touch Medicare, we're not going to touch Medicaid. Well, then he wants to repeal and replace Obamacare with no alternative, and everything they have produced, and this latest one is the worst of all, would, in effect, end Medicaid after a few years. What's going to happen to the millions of families dependent upon Medicaid for nursing home care, or for disability care, or for any kind of community service, or for anything that they have to get through the healthcare system? The cruelty of that is even worse than the hypocrisy. And so I'm hoping that enough Republicans will, as they did last time, say no. I know that the Republicans are trying to bribe people. It's so blatant, it's sickening. And yet it doesn't solve their problem of what happens in a few years to the entire Medicaid program. Right. And let's remember that, there are states that expanded Medicaid to try to provide better health care. And in general, those states like New York, California, others, they've actually seen costs go down. And they've seen private insurance costs for everybody, even those of us not on the exchanges, but getting insurance elsewhere, go down. Because why? When you insure more people, you will be able to deal with preventive care that can hopefully save money on the other end. You will keep people out of emergency rooms, which is the most expensive care, because they will actually have a doctor they can go to. You will be able to get that diabetic his or her insulin so they won't end up needing an amputation. I could go on and on. So that it actually is smart to try to help people get access to affordable quality health care in a way that they can count on. So I'm hoping that this latest Republican stunt, which is totally against everything Trump said in the campaign, which was, again, I don't know, he thought he could say things that he either didn't believe or didn't understand, and now we're seeing the results.
I think he didn't understand. I mean, he's not a policy wonk, and he's not really paying attention to the details. I want to make sure to ask a question that our subscribers submitted ahead of time. This one's from Stephanie. I don't know if you're in the audience, but this is your question. Yes. I watch in awe as you emerge from the most vitriolic campaign with grace and dignity. What advice do you have for the rest of us who are still in a state of shock that the best man, in quotes, did not win, and suffering on a daily basis as we watch what is happening to our country?
Well, Stephanie, you are not alone. The first thing I'd say is that I hope that what I wrote in this book also gives a sense of resilience and optimism back to people, because I know how draining and devastating the election was. And in the weeks since, so many things have happened that have been, really painful for so many people to have to experience. I also think getting active and involved, again, is important. And so at the end of the book, I talk about an organization I started called Onward Together, where I'm supporting young grassroots groups that have sprung up to help recruit and train and support people running for office, who have been going to town halls and helping to equip citizens to ask questions of their elected representatives. On the local level, issues that you care about, educating yourself and being willing to sign a petition, to send a letter, to make a call, calling the senators in Washington on the Affordable Care Act and other issues that are important. I think being active again, at least from my perspective, helps to heal the great disappointment that I feel. And it's not any longer so much disappointment about me. It's disappointment about our country, and it's fear about what's going on around the world, some of the quite irresponsible, even dangerous things that Trump is saying about North Korea and other places. So being active helps me to feel like, okay, I'm trying to get back in this and make a contribution. And there's something for everybody to do. Not everybody's going to run for office. Not everybody's going to, feel comfortable confronting a member of Congress or an elected official. But there's something that everybody can do. And, just find your space.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your question. So just to end the interview, I have a few fun questions. And it's sort of supposed to be rapid fire, so I'm going to ask them quickly. What's your favorite color pantsuit?
Oh, the one I'm wearing. No.
I actually really like this blue.
Thank you.
Favorite character on Game of Thrones?
I shut my eyes through so much of it. The women, even the ruthless women are so intriguing to me. So
They're
I guess,
really intriguing.
yeah, they are really interesting.
So are you more Team Khaleesi or Cersei?
Oh, wow, that is too personal a question.
Right.
I'm for whoever shows the most humanity, and so far, I
would say Khaleesi.
Yeah, I guess
right.
Khaleesi would be closest.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I guess.
I agree.
Yeah. Who knows, though, what might happen at the end?
Right, exactly. So favorite kind of hot sauce?
Oh, I have so many different hot sauces, and, we talked. I talk in the book actually about how much I love hot sauce, and there's a hot sauce that we like called Ninja Squirrel, which I love.
Favorite flavor of goldfish crackers? This is in the book. If you read the book, this is very specific.
Yeah, I am very traditional. I don't like all the new stuff that they put in. I want just the old-fashioned goldfish. Yeah,
I appreciate that. Favorite Republican member of Congress?
Well, right now, John McCain.
Yeah. Love him too. Hope he gets well. Favorite season of the year? We're sort of in an Indian summer, but favorite season?
Well, I love this Indian summer. There's something about September in New York that is so beautiful. That the skies have been so blue, and it's right before the trees change.
Right.
But there's still a lot of we go hiking, we go walking a lot, so there's still a lot of wildflowers and weeds and things that are blooming. So I like this time of year.
Me too. Favorite superhero?
Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I know. That was a good one. So I heard through the grapevine that you like Harry Potter.
Yes.
Do you have a particular house that you prefer? One of the houses in Quidditch. This might be a hard question.
Yeah, that's too hard a question. Yeah, I have, but I will tell you some of the most interesting tweets of the last few months have been by J.K. Rowling.
Yes, she's so great on Twitter.
I mean, she really has been out there, and I appreciate that.
I appreciate that too. She's fierce on there if you don't follow her. Your favorite toy when you play with your grandchildren?
Well, let's see. We like to build things, so there's several different things. Obviously, there's Legos, the big ones, because the older one is only 3, and then there's these magnetic squares and different shapes that can be magnetized one to the other. So that's what we spend our time doing.
And if they end up playing each other this year, because you mentioned this in the book that you're both a Cubs fan and a Yankees fan.
Yes.
But they've always been in different leagues, so you never had to choose.
That's
right. But they might play each other this year.
You think?
I think they might. So who are you going to pick?
Wow.
Cubs or Yankees?
That's a tough question.
I know,
Zerlina.
it's really
That's
hard.
really mean.
Yeah.
And when I first said that, people said, oh, yeah, sure, Well, but it is absolutely true. When I was a little girl, I grew up in Chicago, and my father was a Cubs fan, so we watched every Cubs game on WGN,
right.
And that's when they used to play during the day.
Right.
They didn't play at night for years. I still have a T-shirt which says "No lights at Wrigley Field." I mean, we were hardcore Cubs fans, and we would go to the games, like once a year. And so I grew up loving the Cubs. But if you love the Cubs, in the old days, you had to be just so ready for disappointment.
Right.
And after a couple of years of this, I mean, like when I was 7 years old, I wore a Mickey Mantle Cubs uniform for Halloween, number 7. I was really into it. But I said to my dad one day, I said, but they always lose. I said, who wins? And my father said, the damn Yankees. I said, okay, I'll be for them on the other, in the other league. And so that's how it came to pass. And you know what? I'm not going to answer that hypothetical. I'm going to wait to see if, one more time the heavens intervene. And this would be an amazing series. I watched the last game of the series, which I write about in the book. I had just finished this huge rally in Arizona, 25,000 people. It was so upbeat.
Right.
But I have to confess, I was thinking okay, the Cubs. What's happening with the Cubs?
Right.
So I got out of shaking, after I finished shaking hands and everything, I went back, and one of the guys traveling with me had it set up on his computer, and we just stood in the parking lot waiting for the end of the game. And that was pretty exciting, because one of the people traveling with us was a lifelong Cubs fan, and she had the big W banner and all of that. So I always loved baseball. Yeah. And, I don't get to watch or follow it as much as I'd like to these days. But if what you're proposing comes to pass, you'll have to go with me.
It's possible.
Okay? If it's possible, if it becomes real, we'll go to at least one of the games.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, I'm there. I'm going. I just want to say thank you. I remember the first time we met, you said, I like your tweets. And I was so shocked, because I was like, oh my gosh, she follows me on Twitter. I have to tweet only good things. But you also told me to always speak my truth, and I'm happy you were able to speak your truth in what happened, because I think a lot of people have been waiting to hear all of your truths, and you were able to do that. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Zerlina. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you.